Okay, guys, let's go ahead and go over the Unit 3 test study guide. By now, you should have read this. Remember, there's more information in the syllabus about each test. And do keep in mind, as stated in the syllabus, I'm not quite sure that enough students were aware of this during Unit 2, but during the Unit 2 test or for the Unit 2 test. But in the syllabus, when it comes to describing the test, only 70% of a given test will focus on what you learned in the SMART book. The other 30% comes on previous and new lessons, whether they're written down or in a soft chalk module or a video lecture that I present with respect to intellectual virtue. And I say that because in a previous test, students lost the most points for stuff on intellectual virtue. And I'll say more about that in a moment. General information, so all of this has stayed the same from the last test. You're going to have 40 test items again. 30 items will be focused on what you learned in doing the SMART book reading on metaphysics and the general idea, the general introduction to that chapter, and then of course a focus on the problem of free will and the theories that you read about in doing the SMART book assignment for Unit 3. I do talk about an extra credit option here in the Unit 3 folder. So here we have, I'm in the Unit 3 folder. This is now the first thing that you see, more on intellectual empathy and intellectual perseverance. Before I get into that, I just want to go right back to the study guide for a minute because this blends into the content to focus on. So the first little outline or component or subunit that you have for the study guide in terms of context or content is intellectual virtue. As you can see, there will be multiple fill in the blank, multiple choice, matching, true, false. Keep in mind, as you learned when reading the instructions for the orientation reviewer quiz, when you're taking something in Blackboard, you want to pay attention to the content of the answers. So A could be true or A could be false when you're selecting true, false answers from a matching. So keep that in mind. When it comes to matching and you see that some of the answers to select include the words true or false, don't assume that true will be A or even B for that matter, because sometimes my matching includes not only telling me whether something's true or false, but sentence completion as well. So the answer true and false in a list of matching items might be answers C and D. So make sure, as emphasized during orientation, that you always pay attention to the content of a possible answer and not some letter associated with an answer. All right, so going more into detail, I'm going to provide some more information to help you get ready for this test. The definition for intellectual virtue. So I want you to use the new definition for intellectual virtue, or not so much new because I did present the gist of the new definition in the soft talk module, but during Unit 2, I lectured on intellectual virtue. I had an opening video prior to task 1, and I said, here's the gist of intellectual virtue. Here's what I want you to remember from now on. Here's, what I'll be thinking and saying with respect to intellectual virtue and its definition. I do go over that definition again in a review video that I posted in Unit 3. So make sure that you read this paragraph to get context. And then right here in this video, that's where you're going to get a review of some really important points that I made about intellectual virtue, the new definition that I want you to remember. I need to stop saying new definition, but the definition for intellectual virtue that I want you to remember, that is multiple fill in the blank. So I will have 3, 4 words missing from that definition, and you have to be able to type in the words correctly. Remember, you need to type in the best words per blank space, 1 word per blank space. In this video, I also go over the concept of a virtue itself, the concept of a vice itself, what that has to do with thinking about the opposites or extremes of a virtue. And I decided to go ahead and review that information prior to elaborating on intellectual empathy and intellectual perseverance, precisely because I saw in a previous unit that not enough students had paid enough attention to, well, honestly, only 5 or 6 students had taken the tests 2 or previous test by the time I constructed this. But just in case others will have made the same kind of mistake, I decided to review these concepts. So I did talk about virtues, vices, opposites, and extremes in the video on intellectual humility that I posted prior to task 1 in the Unit 2 folder. And yet I saw a lot of students getting incorrect answers, whether they were constructed as matching or multiple choice or whatnot. So make sure that in preparation for the test that you really are following the videos that I've posted prior to task 1 for Unit 3, any videos that I post prior to a task. Now, when it comes to Unit 3, I did decide to make elements or components or tasks available early. That said, the first thing I made available early was the SmartBook task for Unit 3. So if you're one of, if you're a student who tends to be like ahead of the game and you do assignments as soon as they become available, you might not have seen this component of Unit 3 right here, where I say more on intellectual empathy and intellectual perseverance, because it was not ready yet. So, but I still wanted you to get a head start if you wanted to, so I made the SmartBook assignment ready early. But just make sure that if you did do the SmartBook assignment prior to, let's see, 14, 15, 16, 17, prior to 6:18, let's say 10 a.m., that you go back into Unit 3 and that you watch these videos on intellectual virtue and that you use these study questions. Consider this your study guide for some of the items that you will encounter in the Unit 3 test and even the Unit 4 test. I expected you guys to pay attention to the information solicited in virtue of the questions presented during the Unit 2 test, but I didn't see enough attention. I don't know if that's because students didn't watch the videos on intellectual virtue in Unit 2, if students didn't take good notes, or what. But I've gone an extra step. This is as far as I will go to help you make sure that you are paying attention to and noting important points relative to what I think you should know and understand as assessed in a test. So that's what I was going over in the study guide, like intellectual virtue, the definition that I want you to remember, it's covered in here, as well as other really important concepts that you could be tested on. Here I have a clear, accurate, and precise understanding of the definitions and examples first presented in the soft talk module you completed. So that right here, I posted the link to that. Let's see. So the soft talk module or initial lesson that I referenced with respect to Unit 1, the lesson is right here. So make sure that you're looking at the lesson. Make sure you look at the initial ideas presented on intellectual virtue itself and the meaning of the concept. Do look at the table, knowing that I already elaborated on intellectual humility as presented in the table and in the videos that come prior to task 1 in Unit 3, that I have elaborated on what you see in the table during Unit 3 for intellectual perseverance and intellectual empathy. Make sure that you look at the very last page or the very last, you don't really see a page when you download a soft talk module lesson. It looks weird. I can't change it. When you download a soft talk module lesson, it just looks weird. But make sure you look at the information and the ideas presented with respect to how you cultivate intellectual virtue. Because I noticed that a lot of students did not give correct answers for anything that had to do with cultivating intellectual virtue. So make sure you look at that part of the lesson there as well. Okay, so, and then, of course, this connects with what I've been talking about. You need to have a clear, accurate, and precise understanding of what I lectured on in several short videos prior to task 1 in the Unit 3 folder about intellectual virtue and intellectual vice. So I've already spoken to that. Intellectual empathy, intellectual courage, make sure you listen to those videos, use the study guide questions, take pictures of the PowerPoint slides. Do listen to what I have to say, since there is information, there are insights presented that are not available to you in writing. In this test, there will be no dialogues where you have to figure out who's most strongly reflecting or failing to reflect an intellectual virtue. But I am going to be testing to make sure that you really do understand what each intellectual virtue is about, that you know the names of any of the opposites that I gave you with respect to an intellectual virtue, that you know what a vice is, you know how that connects to what being an extreme is, that you know if something's a deficit or an excess or whatnot. So keep all those things in mind. And remember, when it comes to any multiple choice items in this class, or any item, true, false, or matching, that I don't believe in trick questions. I don't like the concept of a trick question. I don't like it when students use that in my class or me. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just telling you guys I don't care for that, because that makes it seem like the teacher's out to get you, like the teacher's malicious or mean, and it takes away the responsibility of the student to, really know the material. So I don't do trick questions, but I do give you opportunities to make sure that you clearly, accurately, and precisely understand a given concept, idea, theory, lesson, or whatnot.